It was supposed to be a simple evening, just a quiet lounge car on the night train, the kind of place where people nurse their drinks and watch the world blur past the windows, feeling slightly disconnected from everything outside. I hadn't expected complications, especially not the kind that arrived with her, the blue-skinned, impossibly graceful alien who somehow made every human logic I had ever clung to crumble like wet paper. She appeared out of nowhere, as if the train itself had spat her onto the floor in front of me. The first thing I noticed was the way she carried herself, deliberate, teasing, aware of the effect she had on anyone who dared look. I barely had time to register her luminous eyes before she smirked, leaned forward slightly, and plopped down right into my lap. Yes, my lap. And yes, I panicked. Excuse me? I said, my voice cracking somewhere between disbelief and faint admiration. This isn't. Her laugh was soft, melodic, yet it carried an edge that made me feel like a misbehaving child being corrected. Relax, she said, tilting her head with a curious glint in those iridescent eyes. I'm not heavy unless you're thinking otherwise. I froze. My brain, normally reliable at interpreting social cues, short-circuited. I had been sitting quietly trying to read, mind my own business, and now this alien woman, who looked like she had walked straight out of some interstellar art exhibit, was on my lap like she belonged there. And to make matters worse, there was a faint, teasing weight to her tone as if she knew exactly how uncomfortable I was. She stretched slightly, and I noticed the faint shimmer of her skin under the dim train lights. Blue, but not cartoonish, more like the hue of twilight on a calm ocean. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and I caught a subtle scent, something floral, something spicy, something intoxicating that made me forget all pretense of composure. I coughed, cleared my throat, and attempted some semblance of dignity. There's a seat right there, I said, pointing vaguely at the chair beside me. Seats are overrated, she said, pressing herself closer in a deliberately casual way. This is much more personal. Her words lingered in the air with that dangerous double meaning, and I felt the heat rise to my face. Great, humiliation and attraction at the same time, a perfect storm. I opened my mouth to protest again, but she leaned forward, resting her hands lightly on my shoulders. By the way, she added in a softer tone, you're very warm, surprising for a human. That should have been harmless. Instead, it felt like a calculated observation of all my weaknesses. At that exact moment, the train jolted, and we both swayed slightly. I caught her instinctively, and my brain screamed, don't touch her, don't touch her. But my hands were already on her sides, holding her steady. She didn't recoil. If anything, she seemed amused, eyes sparkling with mischief, lips curling into that teasing half-smile. It took every ounce of self-restraint not to groan audibly. My inner monologue was a disaster. Focus on reading the book, Umair. Focus. She's impossible. She can't stay here. She can't. Oh God, she's smiling at you again. Then she shifted slightly, resting more fully against me, as if the previous tension had been an invitation. I felt her breath brush against my neck, and I wanted to remind myself she was alien, but even that logic faltered. Her presence was disarming. Completely, utterly disarming. Before I could recover, she tilted her head, studying me like she was reading an open book. You're stiff, she said softly, almost conspiratorially. Relax, or this is going to be uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. I didn't even know which uncomfortable she meant, the emotional kind, the physical kind, or the why is this alien on my lap kind. Every nerve in my body was screaming. And yet, I didn't push her off, partly because I was polite, mostly because I was absolutely terrified of what would happen if I did. She let out a low chuckle, leaning back slightly. Relax, human. I'm just exploring the human experience. Exploring, right. Apparently sitting in some unsuspecting stranger's lap counted as field research. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized I needed to record this for posterity. Maybe as evidence that aliens are beautiful, teasing, and entirely unhelpful to my social skills. I opened my mouth to say something witty, but before I could, she leaned closer again, lowering her voice, the faint scent of jasmine wrapping around me like a warm, mischievous hug. You're doing fine, she said. For a human. I coughed again. That phrase, so simple, so innocent, hit like a hammer. For a human. Somehow, I was insulted and flattered at the same time. I felt trapped, entirely aware of her eyes on me, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if any human had ever experienced this combination of terror, intrigue, and something dangerously close to desire. And then she moved. Just a hair closer, enough that my chest brushed against hers, and I realized she wasn't going anywhere. She had settled in. This wasn't a momentary prank. She had declared the lap as her territory, and somehow I was the unwitting host. At this point, I had a choice of panic, push her off, and face the possibility of interstellar diplomatic consequences, or accept that I was in deep, deep trouble and just survive. I chose survival. And that's when I remembered the camera I had tucked in my bag. Not to record her, obviously, no, that would be criminally inappropriate, but perhaps to capture the chaos she brought into my life. Because I had a feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't going to be over tonight. Not by a long shot. Also, before we go any further, if you're enjoying this wild ride, make sure to subscribe to follow along, because things are about to get much, much more complicated. Trust Trust me, you'll want to see the next section. By the time the train rumbled through the second station, I had accepted, with a resigned sort of panic, that she was not leaving. She had not moved from my lap for nearly half an hour, and every attempt I made at subtly shifting in my seat only seemed to make her lean closer, as if encouraging me to abandon all dignity. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so acutely aware of my own body, heart hammering, palms clammy, chest tight, but somehow that awareness was entirely her doing. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. She's an alien, I told myself. Her physiology is different. Maybe sitting in laps is normal. But then I looked down at her, the curve of her shoulders so impossibly delicate, the faint shimmer of blue skin under the dim train lights, and that excuse evaporated faster than the coffee I had ignored in my haste to adjust to the situation. Her eyes flicked toward me, wide and curious, and I felt a jolt that had nothing to do with the train's motion. It was the way she was watching me, not like I was a human specimen, not like I was a curiosity, but like she was seeing every twitch, every subtle sign of discomfort, every involuntary reaction, and finding it entertaining. And maybe more than entertaining, I thought, because the way her lips curved, so subtle it almost didn't count as a smile, made my stomach do a thing I didn't have a name for. I have to ask, I said, trying to inject some authority into my voice, though I doubted it landed as intended. Why are you really here? On my lap, I mean. Her head tilted, just slightly like a cat that had found a particularly odd toy. Why do humans always insist on over-explaining? Isn't it simpler to enjoy the moment? Enjoy the moment. That sounded harmless, right? Except her tone had that teasing edge that made you feel simultaneously threatened and foolishly interested. I tried to look anywhere else, out the window, at the train tracks, anything to regain control. But I kept catching her eyes, sparkling, mischievous, and I realized with horror that every time I looked away, she leaned an infinitesimal bit closer, like she could sense my discomfort and was deliberately amplifying it. I wanted to protest, I really did. My mind churned with every polite social script I could think of. Well, you see, this isn't customary, at least not where I'm from. Her laugh interrupted me, soft, musical, and entirely infuriating. Customary is such a fragile concept, isn't it? Human or alien, it's all relative. I simply thought I'd explore. She emphasized the word like it had layers I wasn't meant to fully understand. The thing is, I could not move her. I tried shifting sideways subtly, hoping she would interpret it as polite encouragement to leave. She did not. She pressed closer, light as a feather yet unyielding, as if her presence had weight both physical and psychological. I could feel her breathing, warm against my neck, and it made every rational thought I had start to crumble. I cleared my throat again, trying to summon the sort of confidence I usually reserved for boardroom meetings. You realize that this is kind of intense. She tilted her head back, regarding me like she was examining a puzzle. Intense. She repeated, voice soft, almost dreamy. I hadn't noticed. Then, leaning forward just enough to brush her hand lightly over mine, she added, but if it is, well, perhaps that makes it more interesting. I felt my ears go red. I knew my pulse was audible somewhere, probably thumping in rhythm with the train tracks. I could not, for the life of me, decide if I was horrified, terrified, or ridiculously intrigued, probably all three at once. And then, of course, she did the one thing that made everything impossible to ignore as she rested her head on my shoulder. Just a brief casual movement, but enough to make me painfully aware of the fact that she was still here. Still too close. Still refusing, absolutely refusing, to acknowledge any boundary I thought existed. You are very still, she murmured, for a human. I expected you to squirm more. I swallowed. I'm trying not to faint or something, I admitted, and the words sounded both pathetic and honest. Her laugh was a soft, throaty sound, the kind that teased you and made you wonder if she knew exactly what she was doing. Good. I prefer my humans reactive, she said. Then, with a tilt of her head, added softly, though perhaps I like them a bit stubborn too. I had no idea whether to feel insulted or flattered. I squirmed in my seat slightly anyway, because the proximity was dizzying, confusing. I was acutely aware of every curve, every line, every subtle movement that made her almost impossibly alive, alien though she was. And yet, it wasn't just the physical awareness, it was the mental tug. I felt measured, observed, calculated. And despite myself, I didn't mind. I tried to remind myself that humans and aliens were different, that I should maintain some semblance of emotional distance. But every instinct in my body rebelled. Every rational thought I had about personal space and etiquette disintegrated under the weight of her gaze and that faint, teasing smile. And then it got worse. She shifted slightly again and her hand brushed mine, not deliberately, she claimed, but it was close enough that my fingers tensed. I could feel the warmth of her skin through her clothing, faintly silky and impossibly soft. This is insane, I thought, and yet I realized with a sinking, mortifying certainty that she was enjoying herself immensely. I, on the other hand, was completely under her influence. My thoughts no longer made sense. I couldn't focus on the scenery outside. I couldn't focus on the book I had tucked on my lap. I couldn't even focus on my own breathing without feeling a weird, helpless thrill. Her eyes locked on mine again, and she tilted her head a lazy, almost teasing gesture. "You're tense," she observed. "Would you like me to help with that?" I nearly choked. Help." "Yes," she said simply, as if the word contained an entire universe of possibilities. "You look uptight." Perhaps a human massage might alleviate some tension. I had no idea what she meant, and I think she knew that because she smiled that knowing, teasing smile that made me wonder if she had done this before, with other humans. I didn't want to think about it. My brain short-circuited somewhere around the fourth thought. The train rattled on, and I realized, with growing horror, that I was trapped in a lap I didn't want to leave, by an alien I couldn't stop thinking about. My body was betraying me. My mind was betraying me. Even my sense of propriety was betraying me. And all I could do was sit there, sweat prickling at my temples, and silently plead that no one else had noticed the absurd tableau unfolding in the sleeper car. I glanced at her again. She was calm, poised, and entirely aware of the chaos she had unleashed. And she didn't look like she was planning to leave anytime soon. And that was when I realized the terrifying truth I didn't want her to. By now, I had officially accepted that any attempt to regain control of the situation was pointless. She had not just claimed my lap, she had claimed my attention, my thoughts, and, quite possibly, the part of my brain responsible for rational decision-making. Every time I tried to focus on anything else, the rattling tracks, the passing lights, even the book I pretended to read, she would tilt her head, smile, and remind me that my focus belonged elsewhere. "Do you always sit so stiffly?" she asked, voice soft, but carrying that unmistakable edge of amusement. I stammered, because what exactly does one say when an alien with blue skin is sitting in your lap, smiling like it's the most natural thing in the universe? "I'm conscious of personal space," I tried weakly. Her laugh was musical, low, and utterly infuriating. "Personal space," she repeated, the words rolling off her tongue as if they were a concept meant only for lesser beings. Then, leaning closer so her shoulder brushed against mine, she murmured, "I find human ideas of personal space quaint." I felt my face heat, a sensation I knew she was fully aware of and probably taking quiet pleasure in. The subtle scent of her, something floral, faintly spicy, was impossible to ignore. I tried shifting again, hoping to signal some form of resistance, but every subtle movement only seemed to draw her closer. It was as if she was studying me, teasing me, pressing against me just enough to make me aware of every inch of her presence without ever truly invading it. She sighed softly and rested her head against my shoulder again, and I had to fight the urge to freeze completely. My chest tightened, and I realized my pulse was hammering not just because of proximity, but because of the overwhelming sense of being utterly helplessly observed, and yet I didn't want her to stop. "Why are you like this?" I blurted out. "Why do you do this to humans?" Her eyes glimmered, amused but unreadable. "Like what?" "Tease, torture, sit in laps, make people, feel?" I faltered, the words catching in my throat. "Feel things they're not ready to feel." She tilted her head, gaze sharp and teasing. "And what exactly are you feeling, human?" I could feel heat creeping up my neck. Confusion, panic, slight attraction, embarrassment. I listed the words nervously, as if enumerating them would somehow exercise their power. She chuckled, that soft, throaty sound that made my stomach flip. "Slight attraction," she teased. I would have guessed considerable. I choked on my next words. I don't even know what's going on right now." "Exactly," she murmured, tilting her head so that her hair brushed against my cheek. "Exactly the point." I felt myself stiffen instinctively, aware of how dangerously close she was. Every subtle movement she made, a shift of weight, a brush of hair, the faint pressure of her hand on mine, felt like a deliberate challenge. And somehow impossibly, I was both terrified and fascinated. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I asked, unable to hide the tension in my voice. Her lips curved, just slightly, the hint of a smile that made my pulse spike. "Enjoying it? Perhaps. But I'm also observing, learning. Humans are entertaining." I groaned inwardly. Entertaining. The word sounded innocent enough, but in context, I wasn't sure I would survive the evening. I could feel every nerve ending alive with awareness, every inch of skin alert to her presence. I wanted to protest, to push her off, to scream, but even the thought of doing so seemed impossible without breaking some unspoken code of interaction she had invented. And then it happened. She leaned even closer, brushing her lips near my ear, just enough that I felt the warmth of her breath. "You know," she whispered, voice low, "humans are so predictable, yet utterly fascinating." I swallowed hard, heart racing. Predictable. Fascinating. What does that even mean? Her smile was slow, deliberate, teasing. "It means you're exactly as I expected. Flustered, awkward, curious, and incapable of denying the truth of your own reactions." I felt my stomach twist. Flustered, awkward, curious, she was cataloging my every reaction, and somehow making me wish she wouldn't stop. I had never felt anything like this before. Normally, I could handle humans. I could navigate social cues, maintain boundaries, stay in control. But she, this alien, was rewriting all the rules, turning everything I knew about myself upside down. She shifted again, leaning slightly back, but keeping the weight of her presence firmly against me. Her hand brushed mine again, this time lingering just enough to make me acutely aware of the faint warmth of her skin. And yet, she murmured softly, eyes glinting with mischief, "You're tolerating it." "Yes," I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I can't seem to stop it." Her laugh was like music, soft and teasing. "Exactly." The train rattled on, each jolt a reminder that we were confined together, moving through the night with nowhere to escape. Every attempt I made to focus on anything else, the window, the scenery, the fading lights of distant stations, was interrupted by her presence, by the weight of her, by the subtle heat of her near me. I was aware of every breath, every movement, every faint brush of skin, and the effect it had on me was undeniable. I realized, with a combination of horror and reluctant fascination, that she had me completely, not just physically, but mentally. I was captivated, entirely aware that she was in control, yet unable or unwilling to do anything about it. And that awareness, that helplessness, was both terrifying and intoxicating. "Who men?" she murmured, voice low and teasing. "You're thinking too much." "I groan, I kelpin." "You can," she said softly, leaning her head back against me again. "But you won't, and that makes it more fun." I felt a flush creep up my neck and across my chest. Every nerve in my body was alive, every thought consumed by her presence, every ounce of rationality crumbling under the simple weight of her body against mine. And yet, despite the chaos, despite the embarrassment, despite the utter impossibility of the situation, I found myself wishing it would never end. And just when I thought I had reached the limit of my endurance, she shifted again, a subtle movement that pressed her just slightly closer, and whispered softly, "Do you think you might like this more than you admit?" I swallowed hard, heart racing, chest tight. I don't know." She smiled, knowingly, impossibly. "Oh, I think you do." And with that, the train rattled on through the night, and I realized with growing and terrifying certainty that this alien sitting firmly in my lap, teasing, observing, claiming was not leaving anytime soon. And neither, it seemed, did I want her to. By the time the train rattled through the darkened countryside, the boundaries I had clung to for so long were no longer recognizable. She was still there, comfortably settled in my lap, and I had given up even pretending to resist. Every subtle movement she made, every shift of weight, every brush of her fingers against mine, had become a quiet, irresistible pull I couldn't escape. I had lost track of time. The gentle hum of the train, the occasional whistle in the distance, and the rhythmic clatter of the tracks had become the backdrop to a tension that wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and entirely consuming. I was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her, the faint floral spicy scent that had woven itself into the air around me, and the impossible way her eyes glimmered even in the dim lights, watching me like I was a puzzle she delighted in solving. "You've stopped fidgeting," she observed softly, tilting her head. I was beginning to think humans can't learn calmness. I swallowed, aware that my pulse was still hammering. "I guess I've accepted it," I admitted. "I can't seem to move you, or make you leave, or you don't want me to leave." She finished for me, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial. She shifted slightly, pressing closer, her hair brushing my cheek, her shoulder warm against mine. "That's the honest truth, isn't it?" I wanted to protest, to claim that no, this wasn't fair, this wasn't normal, this was absurd. But the words caught in my throat because the truth was undeniable. I didn't want her to leave, not one bit. "Maybe," I murmured, voice low, "maybe it's not so bad." Her laugh was quiet, a musical sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Not so bad," she repeated, as if teasing me for my reluctance to admit the obvious. "I would say you're enjoying it quite a lot, human." I flushed, heart hammering. Maybe," I admitted, the words awkward, vulnerable, entirely human. "But it's confusing." She tilted her head again, eyes glinting with amusement. "Confusing," she mused softly. "Yes, that's part of the fun." Her hand brushed mine again, light, deliberate, a subtle tether that reminded me I was no longer in control. "Fun, yes, but also enlightening. Humans feel so much, and yet so rarely admit it." I groaned inwardly. I am officially helpless. Every nerve in my body was alive, every thought consumed by her presence, and yet I didn't want to move. I didn't want to stop feeling this strange, intoxicating combination of fear, curiosity, embarrassment, and desire. And then she did something unexpected. She leaned forward just enough that her lips brushed my ear, soft and warm, and whispered, "You don't have to hide from me. I can see everything, all the little reactions, the tiny betrayals of your thoughts." I swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. She smiled, faint, teasing, impossible. "Then don't. Just feel." The train swayed gently, and I realized with a startling clarity that I was doing exactly that, feeling. Every inch of her near me, every subtle motion, every teasing glance, and more than that, feeling something else. Something entirely human that I had tried to ignore, but could no longer deny. She shifted again closer, her head resting lightly against my shoulder, eyes locking with mine. "You like this," she murmured. "Admit it." I closed my eyes briefly, fighting the urge to panic, but also fighting the growing, undeniable warmth spreading through my chest. "Yes," I admitted, voice low, reluctant but honest. I like it." Her smile widened, faint, triumphant. "Good," she whispered. "I was hoping you would." Then, almost imperceptibly, she shifted again, pressing closer, just enough that the warmth of her body enveloped me completely. "And now," she murmured, "you'll have to endure me for the rest of the night." I groaned, half in protest, half in helpless surrender. "Endure you?" "Yes," she said simply, her tone amused, teasing and yet soft in a way that made my pulse spike. "Because I intend to stay, right here, on your lap, all night if necessary." I felt the absurdity of the situation fully, and yet, impossibly, I couldn't bring myself to care. Every rational thought about personal boundaries, about propriety, about social norms had been obliterated. All that remained was the warmth of her, the gentle pressure of her presence, the intoxicating pull of her teasing energy. "Why me?" I asked quietly, almost shyly. "Why sit with me?" Her eyes softened slightly, though the glint of mischief never fully left them. "Because," she murmured, "you're human. Because you react, because you feel, because you don't pretend to be something you're not. And because," she added softly, resting her head again against my shoulder, "you make it interesting." I felt a strange sort of relief. Interesting. Not terrifying. Not impossible. Interesting. And despite the chaos she had brought into my life, despite the embarrassment, despite the utterly impossible situation, I found myself smiling. Because it was true, I was captivated, completely, helplessly, and somehow I didn't want to stop. The train rumbled on through the night, carrying us along, and I realized with a mix of awe and terror that this absurd, impossible, intimate, entirely human experience was not going to end anytime soon. And perhaps deep down I didn't want it to. And as she shifted slightly, brushing her hand against mine once more, whispering something about enjoying human reactions, I understood, with perfect clarity, that some experiences are beyond logic, beyond control, beyond reason. Some experiences, especially with a certain blue-skinned alien, simply are. And in that moment, I surrendered, to the night, to the train, to the alien sitting firmly on my lap, and to the wild, uncharted path she had pulled me onto. Because sometimes, the only choice you have is to embrace the chaos, and that's exactly what I did.